Hi, my name is Jennifer Potash. I use the teaching channel to find a lesson titled Walls and Barriers Using Art to Express Social Issues. I use this lesson to conduct my intentional observation. The classroom setting that this art lesson took place in was Miss Yamashida's art class. It was a high school media arts course, specifically a cyber arts program, and the classroom was a traditional art studio space mixed or blended with a digital art space, managed similar to a lab. It had areas for creating sculpting art as well as doing research on the computer and digital art. Technology was seamlessly integrated with the traditional art making within this class. The approximate size of the class for students was about 30, and the demographic, the school was in Canada, and it appeared to be middle class. I'm making this observation based on the supplies and materials that the classroom had, and also the students within this film were mostly white and Asian. The lesson plan and learning objectives. So the theme overall was walls and barriers, both physical and conceptual. And the artwork that inspired this particular lesson was the art of El Anatsui, who is a Ghanaian sculptor, and he creates very large installation pieces using recycled materials. And this theme of walls or barriers was used by the students to create their project. And I'll try to describe the project to you. There will be samples of it later on in this presentation, but if you can imagine plexiglass pieces that are clear and wired together. Within the plexiglass pieces, the students could create their own original content, and then all of these pieces get hung together in a large installation to create a mass wall out of student work. The artful strategies used were mimicry and metaphor, and the artful routines are questioning and investigating, observing and describing, comparing and connecting. So within the lesson, the students first began by studying El Anatsui and his work, and then they began to research the theme of walls and barriers. And this could be borders between countries, walls between people, socially, personal borders, limitations, blocks, such as language or cultural or race, these types of barriers. And this directly is connected to metaphor. Then the students would peer teach one another in groups about what they discovered through their research. And after that, they began to plan out their own personal design for the project. And then they would build and construct their own sculpture. Within this process, they would receive feedback through critique, both from their teacher and from their peers, and then they would finalize their project. So that's the sequence of learning events within the lesson. So just diving in a little bit more to some of the metaphors of barriers that the students gave examples of within their work. In the lesson, I observed students discussing the idea of a glass ceiling being a conceptual barrier that you can't see, but it's definitely there. Barriers blocking people from exploring nature and having them really be stuck within a city or urban life, and blocking that connection of people with nature. Oops. The barrier that drugs and alcohol can have on people as they're suffering from addiction, that can be a major barrier. And then the barrier that teenagers have with gaming, and that would be a barrier that kids have to getting things done. So these were all barriers observed, student samples of barriers within the lesson. And then here's some examples of student learning, just some quotes that I heard throughout the lesson. And this first one is: the research began with a larger theme of barriers and then led to more in-depth research on one specific type of barrier. So the student was driving their particular choice of what barrier they decided to pursue within their own artwork. And they were able to then teach the whole class and take turns to teach about these different types of barriers. So in the end, the students were all able to discover many types of barriers, learning new concepts, learning new terms, and new ideas about barrier as a metaphor. And through the research and team teaching process, it was very successful for everyone to learn from one another. And also through the presentation of their research, the teacher said that this helped them to meet the visual and performing arts standards. So students must be able to articulate and express their own ideas through art, both orally, written, and through the physical creating of their artwork. And one student said that the skills that she learns in this particular class help her in her everyday life, and she's able to apply the creative thinking and problem solving skills learned in the art class to other subjects outside of school learning as well. So peer feedback was an integral part of the artistic process, as well as receiving feedback from the teacher. And you can see these are pictures from the lesson where the teacher is giving group feedback and the peers are also giving each other feedback. And this particular student was talking about how you can effectively give feedback. And so through this process, the teacher is guiding the students through giving really effective feedback. And this student says feedback should be both encouraging, but it should also ignite critical thinking and prompting students to engage in revisions and ultimately improve their outcome. And the student goes on to say, when I give feedback or get feedback, I'm really thankful to my classmates because it helps me out. I try to sketch out their new ideas, and sometimes I won't end up using my first idea or their idea, but I'll find somewhere in the middle that works better. So this is some great learning outcomes through guided feedback. Here is some sample work, and you can see that this is clear acetate, and here is the example of the drugs or addiction being a barrier to meeting your full potential in life. And you can see here they're helping one another to wire together these pieces of clear plexiglass. And here is another sample of laying out the design, and then also another example of the design with white paper behind it so you can see a little bit better the concepts. There's text on this in both pictures, and the materials were recycled plexiglass, just like the focus artist. They tried to use recycled materials, found objects. They used wire, and they also incorporated digital media, physical drawings and both digital drawings, as well as painted elements into their artwork. And the students could really approach this best to how they conceptualized their work. So it was a very personal process. If the student wanted to pursue it more traditionally, painting and drawing directly on the plexiglass, they could. Or I observed some students at the computer drafting out images digitally and then printing them and applying them that way as well. So my reflection overall, I saw models used throughout this lesson many different times, and the models were used very effectively. The artist sample work was a model, student sample work was a model, the teacher was modeling and demonstrating different procedures and expectations. The work is project-based learning, so the students were able to learn how to use new materials, new tools, and that would then be enhancing their creative problem solving and real world application through the project-based learning. I found that this particular lesson was very student-centered, and student choice drove the production, which resulted in very individualized, personal and meaningful learning for each student, and also enhance the learning of everyone throughout the class, which I personally love to do in my own art room. I loved this lesson, and I would love to create a similar lesson modeled after this particular famous artist. I found it very, very interesting. And I also loved the way that this teacher seamlessly integrated technology with traditional art making skills so that the students are really learning 21st century technology and readiness for careers within the fine arts that could be either traditional or digital. And also the use of critiques to deepen the learning process was also a very positive part of this lesson. And I found that it helped push the students to rethink and revise and improve. And it improved their outcomes. The artful strategies of mimicry and metaphor were used throughout the entire process, and the artful routines of questioning and reflecting and observing and describing and comparing and connecting were seen within the learning process for peer feedback and critique, as well as within their research. They were doing a lot of observing, reflecting, questioning in the research, and then comparing and connecting during peer critique. So overall, I found that the lesson was very successful and I enjoyed it very much. Here are my references. Thank you so much for listening to my intentional observation.